All right, thank you everyone. Sorry for the little change in agenda, but we are working with some speaker logistics, as David said. But today, the Lieutenant, the US Coast Guard, and I are going to be talking to you about managing shipping risks. We promised to keep this light, but before we kind of get started, my name is Jonathan Chair. I'm with MTI Network. For those that don't know MTI, we are an incident response and communications company. We manage over 11,000 vessels, and we handle around about 1,000 incidents every year. Joining me on stage is Lieutenant Matt Zanella. He's with the US Coast Guard. He is with the Department of Commercial Vessel Compliance with a focus on cybersecurity. And I know that commercial vessel compliance is probably something that kind of gives a shudder to everybody in this room, but hopefully we will kind of keep it all light and fun. So we wanted to kind of kick things off just as a reminder of how amazing the industry that we find ourselves is. And now I know that a lot of you guys have seen these stats before and you've kind of touted them in your presentations and things like that, but I think that what gets lost sometimes is how impactful and the scale of the industry really is. The fact that only 1.5 million people move over 8 billion tons of goods a year 11 billion tons of goods a year is really quite amazing. The fact of the matter is that we punch well above our weight. And if you think about it, we're not just the 1%, we are the 0.0001%. So, eat your heart out, Warren Buffett. Although now that I think about it, he's probably that as well. And it's also a really rewarding industry, always socially, but also sometimes financially, depending if you time it right, of course. As you can see by the Clark C Index and its growth in just 1 year of 102%. But with this rewarding industry comes real risk. Risk of an incident happening. As you can see by the photos behind me, some of these incidents can really capture the hearts and minds of people, specifically the media. Our industry is really great at being the industry that the reporters want to create clickbait stories about. These incidents also have real financial risks for investors and owners. And in order to not make this too close to home, I decided to choose some industry-adjacent examples of some of the financial impacts that these incidents had. So now I'm sure that none of these incidents require introduction. However, you could see that there are billions of dollars lost in settlements and in market value when these incidents occurred. Now the good thing is that there is an opportunity to kind of turn that around. And the one thing that these incidents all had in common was how poorly they were managed after the initial incident. You had Boeing's botched cover-up as they were trying to talk about what was actually wrong with their engines. You had the United Airlines poor response by the CEO about dragging a customer off their airplane. And then you had Dieselgate with Volkswagen with regards to their continued cover-up of how integrated their defeat device was across their fleet. And a major catalyst for these incidents to kind of spiral out of control or take on a life of their own is the fact that the way that media and technology has evolved. So in the past, you just had traditional media that you had to worry about, and there's just a few cable networks. If they had picked up your story, that was something that you could deal with, but you could usually manage it because there was a smaller number of channels. However, today, we have, with the advent of social media and smartphones, that's kind of completely changed the game. Now, anybody can create high-quality content and distribute it to thousands of people. It's kind of gone from a one-way broadcast tool from a select few to a two-way conversation that can be held by anybody that's willing to participate. And then finally, what we're starting to see is niche networks emerge, which, without going into too much detail about these different tiers and how they play with one another, it's just the behavior that people are now starting to move away from the broader networks and are kind of self-selecting smaller platforms that better align with their interests or the people in them. So what is the key takeaway here? It just means that there are more channels, more content than ever before. It's happening at a faster pace, and we have less control over it and vetting of the actual facts. So that just really means it's a greater challenge to manage information during an incident. The other thing that has evolved during this time is the risks themselves. So you could argue that geopolitical, you can say that geopolitical has been around for a very long time. However, it's evolved in a way that it's now moving at such a fast pace. Regulations change quickly, and if you're not paying attention, you can get caught out. I'm sure the lawyers in the room are kind of nodding their heads to how this has evolved in the last couple of years. ESG scrutiny we see as a huge risk. And there's kind of two aspects of this. The first one is if you don't have an ESG policy, you get kind of the risk being called out as being a potential laggard. And then if you do have it, the other risk is that if you do have an ESG policy and you don't continue to follow through with it, there is the idea that you could be accused of greenwashing. And then finally, we see cyber attacks as being a real and credible threat. As ships become more and more digitalized, so do the threat of being attacked. But luckily, you don't have to listen to me about cybersecurity. We have our good friends from the US Coast Guard to kind of talk us through that. And so I'm going to hand it over to Lieutenant Zanella for that. Yeah.
All right, they didn't want you guys to have too much fun, so they brought a coastie to talk about cybersecurity. I'm sure everyone's thrilled. As John mentioned, my name is Matthew Zanella. I work for the U.S. Coast Guard's Office of Commercial Vessel Compliance. It's a privilege to represent the Coast Guard here today at an event where so many key stakeholders are gathered. As I told you, I'm here to discuss everybody's favorite topic, cybersecurity, and why it's becoming an increasingly important issue in today's shipping industry. So as we're all aware, the use of computers has changed the way societies and businesses conduct their day-to-day affairs. This fact transcends many different sectors. It's not unique to the maritime industry. As we've relied on more and more on digital technology to make processes more efficient, we have become vulnerable in ways that were previously unaccounted for. I look at the way I used my cell phone 10 to 15 years ago compared to the way I use it now. It's night and day. From monitoring investments, attending meetings for work, checking the home security system, even changing the air conditioner. There's hardly a part of my life which is not documented on my phone. I'm relying on my phone to execute multiple processes daily. The capabilities are awesome, allow me to stay informed and more efficient, but they also represent pieces of information that can be manipulated by potential threat actors. The same evolution has taken place on board ships. On the navigation bridge alone, computers are able to track multiple data points, depth, speed, heading, wind, approach distances of other ships, and they also provide vital communication tools. These communication tools allow the ship to stay connected at all times to ships, facilities, and company staff shoreside. Similar to the cell phone, there is an ever-growing list of information stored on computers within the ship, which is relied upon for day-to-day processes. As many of you are aware, the ability of shoreside personnel to monitor and in some instances control shipboard operations from being on shoreside provide extremely valuable benefits in terms of maximizing efficiency and communication. Correspondingly, however, there is a rising amount of data points which can be manipulated. In becoming efficient, we've extended our cyber attack surface. As an industry, both regulators and operators, we've become quite capable of identifying a broken piece of life-saving or firefighting equipment and understanding the increased risk that poses to our crew and ship safety. In 2022, we need to understand that a cyber vulnerability poses a similar risk to crew and ship safety, and take the steps necessary to mitigate that risk. As the processes which govern today's commercial fleet evolve, the risk managers must evolve as well. I want to introduce a couple of statistics for your consideration. The first was published by the Atlantic Council. In 2021, there was a 33% increase in cyber attacks on ships and port systems, which was on top of a 400% increase in 2020. This speaks to the sheer amount of attacks that have occurred in our industry and how many of these attacks we can expect in our future. The second stat I want to throw out was supplied by the World Economic Forum, which said that 95% of cybersecurity threats that people face are in some way caused by human behavior rather than structural problems within the cyber network. This is to say that as company and shipboard personnel, our behavior and practices play an incredibly important role in how vulnerable we are to a cyber attack. Personnel need to understand the corresponding risk associated with their behavior and practice good cyber discipline, with respect to cybersecurity practices. I know personally from being on board hundreds of ships, there can oftentimes be passwords written on Post-it notes stuck on the monitor. I bring this up not to disparage shipboard officers, as they have an ever-growing list of tasks that they must complete thanks to the pesky regulators, but to illustrate some of the more easily correctable behaviors that unnecessarily increase a ship's vulnerabilities. We also see shared passwords used among the crew, along with rampant use of memory sticks to transfer information. This can be especially dangerous if crew members are plugging those same memory sticks into their personal computers and then plugging into the ship's network. Shipping company personnel nowadays need to be aware that their vessel's processes are heavily reliant on the security of its computers, and that their behavior corresponds directly to that security. It's our jobs as regulators to help ensure that those personnel understand this risk and responsibility. Statistics can be hard to conceptualize, so I'd like to discuss a specific example that was fairly recent. In 2019, an ultra-large container ship transiting within the port of New York and New Jersey was completely debilitated by malware. After contacting the Coast Guard, an investigation of cause and cyber practices on board was completed. The ship's network was restored. The Coast Guard concluded that the ship routinely practiced poor cyber hygiene. Specifically, the ship did not have any sort of antivirus software. They had a shared login among all crew members, and also frequently used memory sticks without security measures. Had the ship proceeded to their intended facility and spread malware to the shoreside infrastructure, the effects could have been exponentially worse. The last point I want to make with respect to this example is that this ship was not specifically targeted. The common belief that cyber attacks are launched only against intended adversaries is false. Conversely, actors will oftentimes look for the easiest target, which promises their greatest chance at success. It wasn't so long ago that cybersecurity attacks were thought only to affect data or information. Cyber attacks didn't have any physical effects. That thought is no longer true, and increasingly, cyber attacks are carried out in order to have physical ramifications. To illustrate the scope of the physical impact a cyber attack could have, I'd like to bring up the motor vessel Zenobia. This was a new build ship in 1980, but it had a faulty ballast water control module that caused excessive flooding in the portside ballast tank. The crew was unable to pump the excess ballast water out of the tanks quick enough, and the vessel subsequently capsized. This wasn't a cyber attack, but it does illustrate what a fault in your control module on board a ship can look like. Fast forward almost 40 years to a recent hacking conference. Through guessing usernames and passwords, a presenter was able to access a ship's ballast water control module during a presentation. I am not going to do that. I'm not capable of doing that. Although the hacker did not proceed any further, the demonstration showed how vulnerable some of these ship systems can be to a malicious actor. As many of you are aware, the IMO recently added cybersecurity to a list of topics that must be covered by a ship safety management system. If you're looking for more information in order to formulate a baseline with respect to cybersecurity, I would encourage review of IMO's cyber risk management guidelines. You don't need to be a computer scientist to read and understand the intent of this document. The organization preaches the importance of having a culture of risk management while also emphasizing the importance of cybersecurity awareness from the top of the company down to the unlicensed crew members on board individual ships. Similar to other aspects of vessel safety and security, there is a need to constantly assess areas of potential vulnerabilities and implement controls to mitigate risk. An important part of being able to respond to a cyber incident is having a thorough response plan in place. If there's one thing that we do well as an industry, it's producing plans for potential casualties. We have vessel response plans in the event that oil spills overboard. We have a separate response plan if we spill oil on board. Similarly, a cyber incident response plan can alleviate much of the confusion that can occur following an attack. A thorough response plan incorporates lessons learned from previous cyber incidents. Additionally, plans should be available via hard copy in the event that the ship's network is kicked offline. Lastly, the plan should be filled with resources and contact information so that affected parties can quickly notify response experts. Speaking of response experts, I want to quickly mention a Coast Guard unit that deploys in the event of cyber incidents. This is our deployable geek squad, if you will. Don't tell them I said that. The cyber protection team was a group of Coasties that responded to the vessel transiting in New York that was kicked offline. In addition to response, though, they can also engage with industry to evaluate and improve cyber risk management practices prior to an incident occurring. More information can be found just by Googling USCG Cyber Protection Team, and they're also available via email at maritimecyber@uscg.mil. That will conclude my presentation. Sorry if I went a little long, but this was an honor to be here, so thank you for your time and attention. And John and I will be available to discuss further and hopefully answer any questions that you have. So thank you.